"Get your hands off me!" "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside," I said. "Get your hands off me!" That was how it started. Not with a gavel, not with a verdict, with 2 words from a woman in a gray cardigan who looked to the wrong pair of eyes, like she had no business being there at all. Her name was Vera Ashton, 44 years old, 5'4", hair pulled back in a low bun that had been neater at 7 that morning, before the drive, before the traffic on I-95 that added 31 minutes to what was supposed to be a 40-minute commute. She was carrying a canvas tote bag from a grocery store that no longer existed. The kind of bag you keep using long after the store closes because it's sturdy and it holds a lot and you never quite get around to throwing it out. Her cardigan had a small snag near the left elbow. Her shoes were clean but not expensive. She looked like someone's aunt. She looked like someone who packed her own lunch and kept coupons in her glove compartment and knew exactly where to find the best pie in whatever county she happened to be driving through. She did not look like the Chief Justice of the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. That was, as it turned out, a very expensive mistake for Officer Dale Kowalski to make. The Hartwell Federal Courthouse had been standing for 81 years on the corner of Chambers and Center in Lower Manhattan, and in all that time, nobody had managed to drag a sitting federal judge out of it by her elbow. There is, to be clear, a first time for everything. Most firsts are worth celebrating. This one was not going to be. It was a Tuesday in early October, the kind of morning where the light is sharp and thin and the air has finally made good on summer's long overdue resignation. Vera had arrived at 8:47 a.m. She always arrived early. 40 years of habit, first as a law clerk, then as an associate, then as a partner, then as a prosecutor, then as a district judge for 11 years before the appointments that changed everything, had trained her body to be early the same way other people's bodies are trained to want coffee. She didn't need an alarm. She just woke up and moved. She had parked in the garage on Worth Street because the reserved lot beneath the courthouse was under construction, which was a whole separate issue. We had sent 3 memos about, none of which had produced anything except a polite response from facilities management and a temporary parking arrangement that added 6 minutes to her morning walk. 6 minutes she did not mind. She used them to think. That morning she was thinking about the Delaney case. United States v. Delaney had been sitting on her docket for 14 months, a wire fraud matter that had expanded in scope 3 times over and now involved 4 defendants, 2 international subpoenas, and a jurisdictional question that was going to require her to write 60 pages before she was done. She was working through the Third Circuit's precedent in her head, footnote by footnote, when she reached the main entrance of the courthouse and held the door for a young woman pushing a stroller. She did not notice Officer Kowalski right away. He noticed her. He was 28 years old, 14 months into his position as a courthouse security officer, and he had been given a specific assignment that morning: manage the flow of civilian visitors to the 3rd floor administrative hearing and keep the main atrium clear for an overflow of press, who were there to cover a high-profile sentencing in courtroom 6. He had a list of authorized personnel on a clipboard. He had a radio on his hip. He had, from the vantage point of the security desk, watched Vera walk through the door in her gray cardigan with her grocery store tote bag, and he had already made his decision before she reached the desk. "Excuse me." He stepped forward. "Ma'am, this area is restricted access this morning. I'm going to need to see your credentials." Vera set her tote bag on the counter. "Good morning." She reached into the front pocket of the bag and produced her federal court ID, the hard-backed card with her photograph, her name, her title, and the gold seal of the federal judiciary printed clearly in the upper left corner. She placed it on the counter. Kowalski looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at it again. He did not pick it up. "Do you have a scheduled appointment, ma'am?" Vera looked at him. She was very still when she looked at people. It was something other judges had mentioned about her, clerks, lawyers who had argued before her for 20 years. She went very still and she looked at you, and you had the uncomfortable sensation that she was reading you the way other people read a brief, thoroughly, without missing anything, forming conclusions she had not yet elected to share. "I work here," she said. "I understand that, ma'am, but we have a restricted access protocol this morning due to the press presence for the Whitfield sentencing, and I've been instructed to verify all personnel entering the atrium. Do you have an appointment with a specific courtroom or office? I have, Vera said with great patience. A courtroom. It's courtroom 4. It has my name on the ID on the counter, has my name, my title, and my photograph. I'd encourage you to look at it more carefully. Kowalski glanced at the ID again. The name read Han Vera L. Ashton, Chief Judge, U.S. District Court, SDNY. The photograph was accurate. The seal was real. He still did not pick it up. Later, much later, in a deposition that would become Exhibit B in a formal complaint, Kowalski would explain that he had been told to watch for fraudulent credentials, that people had apparently tried to enter the courthouse before using fabricated IDs, and that he had used his best judgment given the situation. His best judgment, apparently, was that a woman in a cardigan with a grocery bag was more likely to be carrying a forged federal judiciary card than an actual one. He reached for his radio. "I'm going to need to call this in before I can let you through." "No," Vera said. "You're not." "Ma'am, I have a bail hearing in courtroom 4 that begins in 11 minutes. The defendant's attorney has already filed 2 continuance requests that I have denied. If I am not on the bench in 11 minutes, there will be a procedural question raised about that denial that will take 6 weeks to sort out. I will not be calling that ahead of me. Please step aside." She picked up her ID from the counter and moved toward the atrium. That was when Kowalski made the second mistake. He put his hand on her arm. Not a grab, not yet. A hand on her arm, the way you stop someone who is walking away from you when you believe you still have authority in the situation. It was a mistake compounded of certainty. He was certain he was right, certain she was wrong, certain that a woman in a cardigan with a grocery bag could not possibly be who her ID said she was, because if she were, someone would have told him. Someone would have flagged it. Someone would have made sure he knew. No one had, because no one thought they needed to. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop." Vera stopped. She looked down at his hand on her arm. She looked up at his face. "Remove your hand," she said, quietly. No rise in pitch, no tremor, the kind of quiet that has been in the room before and knows how to wait. "I can't let you through until I verify. Officer." She read his name badge. "Kowalski. I am going to give you one more opportunity to look at the ID in my hand and do the correct thing. After that, whatever happens next is your decision and its consequences will belong entirely to you." Kowalski's jaw tightened. He had been trained for exactly this. People who pushed back, people who got loud, people who tried to bluff their way past a checkpoint. He had not technically been trained for what to do when the person pushing back was telling the truth. The training hadn't covered that gap. "Ma'am, I've been instructed." "Hey, Dale." A second officer, older, gray at the temples, had clearly been watching from the desk, spoke up from across the atrium. "Dale, what's the situation?" "Unverified civilian, trying to access restricted area." "She's not unverified," the older officer said, standing up from his chair slowly, the way people stand up when they realize they have been watching something go wrong and waited about 45 seconds too long to intervene. "Dale, hold on." But Dale Kowalski had already made his third mistake. He took her by the elbow, not rough, not violent, not in the way that would look terrible on a security recording. And there were 3 cameras in that atrium, a fact that Vera had clocked when she walked in, the same way she clocked the 2 press photographers staging near the elevator bank, the court reporter coming through the east entrance with her steno machine case, the defense attorney for the Whitfield sentencing, who was standing 20 feet away with his phone in his hand and his mouth slightly open. She had clocked all of it. She always did. Kowalski walked her toward the main entrance, not forcefully, guiding. The way you guide someone when you are certain that you are in charge of the situation and that the situation will resolve itself quietly once the other party understands they have no recourse. She did not yell. She did not struggle. She walked with him the way a person walks when they have decided that the most important thing they can do right now is let something finish happening. At the door, he released her arm. "You can wait out here while I call this in," he said. "If your credentials check out, you'll be allowed back in within the hour." "Within the hour," Vera repeated. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a long moment. The October air was cold at her back. The press photographers were visible through the glass, still near the elevator bank. One of them now with his camera raised, having apparently decided that whatever was happening at the main entrance was more interesting than the Whitfield sentencing. "What's your full name?" she said. "Officer Dale Kowalski, ma'am, badge number?" He paused, very briefly, almost imperceptibly, before he recited it. She did not write it down. She did not need to. "Thank you," she said, and she walked back to the door and pulled it open. "Ma'am, I'm going to my courtroom now," she said. "You can attempt to stop me again if you'd like. I'd encourage you to think carefully about that before you decide." She walked back into the atrium. The older officer, his name was Frank Delacroix, 22 years on the job, and he was going to spend the next several weeks genuinely wishing he had stood up from that desk 45 seconds earlier, had reached the security station and was now holding the phone away from his ear with an expression on his face that was equal parts dread and the specific exhaustion of a man who has seen a lot of things go sideways and knows immediately, precisely, and without any room for doubt that this is one of those things. "Dale," he said, "did you just—" She didn't have a verified appointment. "Dale." Frank set the phone down. He was looking at the ID that Vera had set on the counter when she came back in. The ID he now picked up and read. "Dale, do you know what SDNY stands for?" "Silence. Southern District of this is a Southern District Courthouse, Dale. She's the chief judge of this court. She's the chief judge of this specific building." The defense attorney for the Whitfield sentencing. His name was Preston Aldrich, a man who had been practicing federal criminal law for 27 years and had argued before Vera Ashton's bench on 11 separate occasions, had been watching from across the atrium. He had not intervened. He would later, in a candid moment during a deposition, admit that he hadn't been entirely sure he was seeing what he thought he was seeing, and that by the time he was sure, it was already over. But he had his phone out. He had been filming since Kowalski put his hand on her arm the first time. He would later say, and this would be entered into the record, "I've been in federal court for almost 3 decades. I have never seen anything like it, and I have argued in front of Judge Ashton enough times to know that the most interesting part wasn't what was happening to her. It was that she looked completely unsurprised. She was not unsurprised, she was furious. But fury for Vera Ashton was a cold thing, a sharp thing, a thing you did not let show until you were ready to use it, and she was not yet ready. She had a bail hearing to run. She walked to the elevator bank without looking back at Kowalski. She rode to the 4th floor. She pushed open the door to her chambers at 8:59 a.m., 11 minutes after she had entered the building, and her clerk, a third-year law student named Tobias, who had been working for her for 8 months and had learned to read her the way you learn to read weather, looked up from his desk, looked at her face, and said, very carefully, "Good morning, Judge Ashton. Everything okay? Pull the personnel file for the security contractor assigned to the main entrance detail," she said, "and call court administration. I need chamber counsel in here by 10. Tobias typed something, pulled something up. "The bail hearing, Tran Mercado, is ready. They're waiting. I know." She set her tote bag down on the chair by the window. "Give me 2 minutes." She stood at the window for 2 minutes and looked at the city. The East River was visible from here, just barely, a gray stripe between buildings. She had been looking at it from this window for 9 years. First as a district judge in this building, then as chief. She had presided over nearly 1,400 cases from this building. She had walked through that atrium approximately 2,000 times. She picked up her robe from the back of her chair, put it on, and went to court. The Tran Mercado bail hearing ran 40 minutes. At the end of it, she denied bail a second time on the record, with an oral explanation that her clerk later said was one of the most precise things he had ever heard her say, which was notable because everything she said was precise. She cited 2 cases. She addressed the flight risk factors directly and without hedging. She noted the defendant's prior failure to appear on a 2019 charge in the Northern District with the same flat final certainty she brought to everything. Then she returned to Chambers and the day began in earnest. By 11 a.m., Chambers counsel, a woman named Harriet Vance, 20 years in court administration, who had the energy of someone who has been solving problems before most people have finished their coffee, had reviewed the security camera footage from the atrium. All 3 angles. She watched it twice. Then she called the security contractor's regional supervisor. Then she called the courthouse marshal's office. Then she sat down across from Vera's desk and said, with the particular careful neutrality of someone delivering news they have already processed on behalf of the person they're delivering it to. The footage is clear. All 3 cameras. I know it is, Vera said. She was reading a brief. She did not look up. Kowalski has been pulled from his post. The contractor has been notified. There will be a formal review. There will be more than a formal review. Vera turned a page. What is the protocol for a security officer who physically removes a federal judge from a federal courthouse? Harriet Vance had looked this up. It would depend on whether it was knowing or unknowing, whether the officer knew the person's identity and disregarded it, or whether it was a misidentification. He had my ID in his hand. Yes, he read it. The footage suggests he did. Yes. And then he put his hand on my arm and walked me outside. Yes. Vera set the brief down. She looked at Harriet Vance. Then I want the complaint filed today, not as an internal review, as a formal complaint to the Inspector General's office and the contractor's national oversight body. I want it in writing that a federal law enforcement officer removed a sitting chief judge from her own courthouse after being presented with valid credentials, on camera, in front of witnesses. Harriet wrote something down. There will be press. There is already press, Vera said. There were 2 photographers in the atrium this morning. I don't know yet what they filmed. I'd assume we'll find out by afternoon. She was right. By 2 p.m., a 17-second clip had been posted to a news aggregator account, slightly shaky, shot from across the atrium, clearly Preston Aldrich's footage, showing Vera walking calmly through the main entrance of the courthouse, presenting her credentials, and then being escorted out by a man in a security uniform while a second officer watched from the desk. The clip had no audio. It did not need any. The image was entirely sufficient. By 4 p.m., it had been shared approximately 40,000 times. By 5 p.m., the security contractor's communications director had issued a statement describing the incident as a serious procedural failure that was under urgent investigation. The statement did not mention Vera's name. It did not mention Kowalski's name. It mentioned procedure 3 times and training twice and regret once, in the last sentence. Vera did not read it until she was in the car home. Her driver, a retired NYPD officer named Cornelius, who had been driving her for 6 years and had the excellent quality of knowing exactly when to talk and exactly when not to, handed her his phone when she got in, and she read the statement in the 40-second silence before she handed the phone back. How was court? Cornelius said. Productive, she said. She looked out the window for a moment. The city was doing what it did in October at 6 p.m., golden and relentless. Do you know what the strangest part was? She said. Cornelius waited. He looked at my ID and he put it back on the counter without picking it up. He read my name and my title and he put it down and he looked at me and he still decided I wasn't who I said I was. She paused. I've been thinking about that all day. What conclusion did you come to? Cornelius said. That he had decided before he looked, she said. The ID didn't matter. He'd already made up his mind about me when I walked through the door, and the ID was just something to wait out. She said it without bitterness, without heat, the way you say something that you have already folded into understanding, that you have already filed in the correct place in your mind. He was wrong, Cornelius said. He was wrong, she agreed, and now everyone knows it. The formal complaint was filed at 4:47 that afternoon. It named Officer Dale Kowalski by badge number. It cited the 3 specific camera angles by footage timestamp. It attached a copy of Vera's federal judiciary ID, with a certification from the issuing office that the card was genuine and had been in continuous active use since her appointment to the chief judgeship. It was 12 pages. Harriet Vance had written most of it. Vera had reviewed every sentence and changed 4 of them. The Inspector General's office acknowledged receipt at 5:22 p.m. The contractor terminated Dale Kowalski's assignment the following morning, pending the outcome of the investigation. Kowalski, according to a source later quoted in a legal trade publication, maintained that he had been following protocol and that the situation had been ambiguous. The publication noted, in the same paragraph, that the situation had in fact been documented by 3 security cameras and a private attorney with a cell phone, none of which had found it particularly ambiguous. The older officer, Frank Delacroix, cooperated fully with the investigation. He provided a statement that was thorough, accurate, and visibly remorseful. He had 22 years of service and a clear record, and the investigation found that he had failed to act quickly enough, but had not actively participated in the removal. His personnel file received a notation. He also, according to court administration, sent a handwritten letter to Judge Ashton's chambers, which her clerk Tobias received and placed on her desk with a post-it note that said simply, "This one you should read." She read it. She did not respond in writing. She did ask Tobias to find out whether Frank Delacroix had any retirement paperwork pending, and when Tobias confirmed that he was planning to retire in March, she made sure the Judicial Council's Commendation Review Committee received a note about his 22 years of service before his file was closed. That was the kind of thing she did when no one was looking. 6 weeks after the incident, Dale Kowalski attended a formal review hearing. The room was small, a conference space in the Inspector General's regional office on Varick Street, the kind of room with fluorescent lights and chairs that had been bought in bulk sometime in the late 90s. He was accompanied by a union representative. Across the table sat 2 investigators and a court administration attorney named Miriam Chen. Vera Ashton was not in the room. She was in courtroom 4, presiding over a motion to suppress. She had submitted her account of events in writing, in the same measured, specific, footnoted prose she used for everything. Kowalski was asked, at one point, why he had not picked up the ID. He said he had been suspicious of it. He was asked what had made him suspicious. There was a pause, a long one. He said he wasn't sure. He was asked whether he had received training on identifying valid federal judiciary credentials. He said yes. He was asked whether the credential he had been shown matched the description of a valid federal judiciary credential as outlined in his training materials. There was another pause. He said he thought so, yes. He was asked why, if that were the case, he had proceeded with the removal. He did not have a clear answer to that. He said things about protocol and crowd management and his assignment that morning. He said things about the restricted access situation. He talked for several minutes without once providing an answer to the question that had been asked. Miriam Chen wrote something down. She did not share it with anyone in the room. Later, in her finding summary, she would write that the officer's inability to articulate a legitimate grounds for his actions, combined with the photographic and video evidence and the witness account provided by Mr. Preston Aldrich, left no reasonable interpretation of the incident other than that the removal had been carried out without legal basis and in direct contradiction of both the officer's training and the contractor's stated protocols. Kowalski's contract was not renewed. He was barred from future employment in any federally contracted security capacity for a period of 3 years. The contractor revised its credentialing verification protocols, required a new training module, posted updated procedures, sent a formal letter of apology to the Chief Judge's office. Vera's clerk received the letter on a Thursday and placed it on her desk. She read it on her lunch break, between the end of a sentencing hearing and the start of a scheduling conference. She read it twice. Then she set it down and ate her lunch, a sandwich she had made at home that morning, turkey and mustard on rye, the same thing she had been making on Tuesday and Thursday since approximately 2009, and went back to work. 3 months after it happened, a second-year law student in a constitutional law seminar at Fordham raised the incident in class discussion. The professor, who had been a federal clerk in the Southern District in the 90s and knew the name Vera Ashton the way you know the name of a landmark you pass every day, let the discussion run for 40 minutes, which was unusual for him. The student who brought it up said she found the most interesting part of the story to be not what had happened in the atrium, but what Judge Ashton had done after. The fact that she had gone straight to her courtroom, had run a bail hearing, had not canceled anything, had not sent a statement to the press, had not made a public appearance or given a quote, had simply filed the complaint, done her job, and let the process work. She trusted the system, the student said. The professor was quiet for a moment. Did she? He said. Or did she know how to use it? The class thought about that for a while. There was no clean answer. That was in many ways the point. Vera Ashton has been Chief Judge of the Southern District of New York for 9 years. In that time, she has presided over more than 1,400 cases. She has written opinions that have been cited by the Second Circuit and, on 2 occasions, referenced in Supreme Court briefs. She has trained 6 clerks, all of whom have gone on to distinguished careers, 2 in private practice, one as a federal prosecutor, one as a law professor, two as clerks for circuit court judges. She still drives to work on days when the garage on Worth Street is not under construction, which it currently is not. She still carries the canvas tote bag from the grocery store that closed in 2018. On the morning of October 11th, she walked into the Hartwell Federal Courthouse at 8:47 a.m., and a security officer looked at her federal judiciary ID and put it back on the counter without picking it up. He was wrong about her. He had decided he was right before he looked, and the looking didn't change anything, because the decision had already been made. That is the thing about that kind of certainty. It insulates itself. It doesn't need information. It already knows. She knew something too. She knew what she knew. She knew where she was going. And she knew that no one who decided the wrong thing before looking was going to stop her from getting there. Some people learn that the hard way. Officer Dale Kowalski learned it in a fluorescent-lit conference room on Varick Street, across a table from two investigators who had already read 3 camera angles and a 12-page complaint and a statement from a 27-year federal attorney who had filmed the whole thing on his phone. The clerk bowed his head when she entered courtroom 4. He said, "All rise." Everyone did. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been looked past, looked through, or looked at like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be, drop something in the comments. We read them, and if you want more stories about what happens when people underestimate the wrong person, you know where the subscribe button is. We'll be here.